So it's kind of interesting to have a conversation with a scientist as a philosopher, and I'm caricaturing the scientists I have conversations with and myself when I do this, when I even call myself a philosopher and then scientist, because like what does that even mean? But you know it means something, and or at least I'm gonna try to describe what I think the relation or conversation that goes on between these two kinds of people is, or what it's like. Um, and you know, it seems that I usually, when I talk to scientists, end up trying to tell them that there's this thing that they can't explain, and they hate that because they were just waiting for me to tell them what the thing is that they won't be able to explain because they're going to show me exactly how they can explain it. But see, what I can't explain to them is, you know, okay, you wanna explain something, but what is it you want to explain, right? And then you realize, when you take a step back from the scientific method, take the position of a philosopher, and you look at it, science, this phenomenon of science, and you say, well, what do? Well, you make a theory, and based on the theory, you try to explain something. But what it is that you're trying to explain is always built into the theory. So, what are you explaining then when you do science? Well, you're explaining your own theory. You're shedding light on the paradigm which you constructed based on your use of language and mathematics and experimental apparatus, um, your use and your community, your local um, culture of experimentation and abstraction is constructed. So you do science after you construct a theory. And philosophy, I think, is really about meta theory. It's about trying to come to understand in some general way what the best kind of theory might be. Um, so, you know, I'm taking a course in metaphysics right now, which, as a scientist, when you hear that word, you're pretty much thinking, oh, you mean nonsense. So, what is it that metaphysics is supposed to be? If it's not nonsense, it's exactly it's exactly this. It's questioning the nature of science, um, which is questioning the nature of nature, and that's where the meta comes in because you're performing this recursive operation, and it's not going to provide you with any sort of foundation, at least not initially. Um, you know, doing science is basically turning outward, paying attention to your senses, um, what you can measure and weigh and clock. But philosophy is turning inward, um, trying to understand the qualities of things, the essences behind the appearances. So much of what you say about it has relevance only to something which cannot be seen, cannot be touched, cannot be measured. Um, so, you know, I just made a video about Dennett and Dawkins where I criticize them for being Platonists, and it's not even so much that I don't think Plato was onto something. I mean, Whitehead said that all of Western philosophy is basically the footnotes to Plato, and it's true. Plato laid the foundation, and all of what we've been talking about, including what we've been talking about in science, obviously, if you look at what, you know, Dennett, who's probably, as a public figure, the most popular scientist today. I mean, besides Einstein, the most popular living scientist, at least because biology has kind of taken over the reign of public attention from physics. Now that nobody can understand quantum physics, everybody's moved on to biology, and it's the scientists who are interpreting biology for the public that have become really the superstars. Um, though there has been a counterculture where the superstars were psychologists, but that's kind of a different current running through society. And the spotlight are the Richard Dawkinses and the Daniel Dennett's, at least on the intellectual popular culture, if I could coin a new term. But so Dawkins, as a scientist, what is he telling us? I mean, about nature. Is he well he's a scientist, or at least that's how he tries to. That's his public persona. He's not a philosopher, though he's attempting in most of his popular books to do a philosopher's work. Which really biology, since if you've read Darwin's book, it's more of it's natural philosophy really, which is how science originated. But you wouldn't consider it a scientific text, as though it were if it were physics or chemistry or something like that. To do biology, you have to speak in generalities, in philosophical terms. Not that you can't say something meaningful or empirical or something that you can prove quantitatively. You can still say these sorts of things as a philosopher, but he was making as much a political statement as he was a statement about nature. In other words, to do biology, you really have to include the human being and everything that comes along with the human being, like society and religion and art and government. You have to be able to explain these things, or at least describe them in biology, whereas in chemistry and physics, you don't really care. It's not relevant at all to the investigation that you're doing, because it's such a you're looking at such an abstract realm. Not that it's not really there, that there aren't really molecules and atoms and stuff, but to come to know them, you must really get out of your embodied societal human experience. You must put on your lab coat and put on a serious face and go into the laboratory with focus and some kind of professional drive, so that you can calculate all the numbers and get the job done. And I'm glad that people are doing that. I'm not trying to knock it or anything, but it's hard to do that and then also be a philosopher. It's not that it can't be done, but it's difficult. It's difficult. So, that's why we've got societies where philosophers, people like philosophers and people like scientists, kind of, diversify themselves and come into relation with other human institutions, and each one of us is necessary. We kind of balance out each other. But I'm worried that people don't think of philosophy as being relevant to anything that matters. A lot of people think it's kind of pointless. Not just scientifically minded people, but artists too, because they think, you should be trying to express the ineffable, not trying to define the ineffable, because how could you possibly do that? But philosophy today doesn't necessarily have to be in opposition to art or to aesthetic experience. It can be itself an art. So what is art? I mean, does an artist define themselves, or do they need critics? Do they need philosophers to do it for them? I don't know.